When archaeologist Taylor Hermes extracted DNA from a 4,000-year-old sheep tooth unearthed at Arkaim, Russia, he expected the usual genetic noise from ancient bone fragments. What he got instead stopped his entire team cold. Hermes recalled that it was alarm bells for his team, and that it was the first time they had recovered the genome from Yersinia pestis in a non-human sample. Yersinia pestis is the bacterium that causes plague. It is the same pathogen responsible for the Black Death, which killed 1/3 of medieval Europe. But this was not medieval plague. This was something far older and far stranger. The sheep died around 1850 BCE at a fortified settlement in the southern Ural Mountains, built by the mysterious Sintashta culture. These people were the tech giants of the Bronze Age. They invented the spoked wheel war chariot, mastered bronze metallurgy on an industrial scale, and were among the first true horse riders. Their fortress cities like Archaim had circular walls about 16 feet high, and their elite graves contained the earliest known chariots buried alongside warriors with bronze weapons. But the explosive part of Hermes's discovery was not just that a sheep had died of plague 4,000 years ago. It was what that sheep revealed about a ghost pandemic, a disease that haunted humanity for 2,000 years and then vanished without a trace. Here is the problem that has stumped scientists for a decade. We know plague ravaged Eurasia between 5,000 and 3,000 years ago. Ancient DNA proves it. Human remains from Sweden to Siberia, from Latvia to Kazakhstan, were all infected with identical strains of Y. pestis. The disease spread across about 3,100 miles, and it persisted for 2,000 years. But genetically, it makes no sense. The medieval Black Death was a flea-borne nightmare. Fleas bit infected rats. The bacteria multiplied in the flea's guts, creating a blockage, and when a flea bit a human, it regurgitated plague bacteria directly into the bloodstream. This caused bubonic plague, swollen lymph nodes called buboes, and had 60% mortality without treatment. Pandemic-level transmission happened through rats infesting dirty medieval cities. But the Bronze Age strain, scientists call it the LNBA lineage, the late Neolithic and Bronze Age lineage, was missing the key genetic mutations that allow the bacterium to colonize a flea's gut. It physically could not be transmitted by fleas. So how did a disease that cannot use fleas infect people across an entire continent for 2,000 years? How did it travel from the Russian steppes to family tombs in Sweden? We have over 200 Y. pestis genomes from ancient humans, explained Ian Lightmacher, lead author of the sheep study published in December 2024. But humans are not a natural host of plague. That was the mystery. The plague was everywhere, but the delivery system was missing, until the sheep. To understand what the sheep discovery solved, we need to see what this plague actually did to people. Because while scientists were debating transmission mechanisms, the Bronze Age world was dying. In 2024, researchers published a study in Nature examining 108 individuals buried in megalithic passage tombs across Scandinavia between 3,300 and 2,900 BCE. These were not ordinary graves. They were massive stone chambers, some over 52 feet long, built during the peak of the Neolithic age. The team extracted DNA from teeth and found that 17% of the dead had active Yersinia pestis infections when they died. Not past exposure, not recovered antibodies. Active, raging plague. The grim reality comes into sharp focus in one family tomb at Falbygden, Sweden. Using genetic analysis, researchers reconstructed a family tree spanning 6 generations over 120 years. Of the 38 family members buried there, 12 died of plague. That is a 32% mortality rate, roughly equal to the Black Death 3,500 years later. The genomic evidence showed this family endured 3 distinct waves of disease. The first 2 were not particularly deadly, but the third wave cut through them like a scythe. Multiple generations died with active infections, buried together in what must have been a desperate rush. Since the bacteria could not use fleas, this was likely pneumonic plague, the deadliest form, where the bacteria infect the lungs. Victims cough up blood filled with billions of pathogens. Anyone who inhales those droplets contracts the disease. Without treatment, death comes in under 2 days. Maria Spyrou, a paleogeneticist at the University of Tübingen, noted that there was a relatively high frequency of disease in this population. She suggested that the fact survivors still managed to bury their dead pointed to something even more chilling. Maybe we are only seeing the very beginning of the outbreak, and then society collapses, and they are not burying anyone. This Swedish family's tragedy was not isolated. Between 3450 and 3000 BCE, populations across Western Eurasia crashed by up to 50%. Nearly 1,000 years of population growth, fueled by the agricultural revolution, were erased in 450 years. Archaeologists call it the Neolithic decline. The timing matched perfectly with the plague findings. Megalithic construction, those massive stone monuments that had defined the age, suddenly stopped. The megasettlement of Maidanetsky in Ukraine, which once housed 50,000 people in thousands of buildings, collapsed during this period. Other settlements were abandoned, some burned to the ground, as if people were trying to ensure whatever lurked inside would never escape. Large grain stores that could feed thousands also attracted rodents, the natural reservoir of plague bacteria. Dense populations, poor sanitation and proximity to animals created perfect conditions for pandemic spread. Some estimates suggest 5 million people died during the Neolithic decline. Relative to total population, that made it deadlier than the 1918 Spanish influenza and the AIDS pandemic combined. In some regions, population levels did not recover for 3,000 years. For decades, archaeologists had proposed various causes: climate change, agricultural collapse, warfare, and general pathogen load. But without FLEA transmission, how could plague alone explain a continental catastrophe? The answer was grazing on the steppes of Bronze Age Russia. When Taylor Hermes and his international team compared the plague genome from the Arkaim sheep to other ancient genomes, they found something remarkable. It was nearly identical to a strain that had infected a human at a nearby Sintashta site around the same time. Hermes said, "If we did not know it was from a sheep, everyone would have assumed it was just another human infection. It is almost indistinguishable." This was the smoking gun. Humans and sheep were sharing the same disease. The question was, who was infecting whom? The answer lies in the dramatic transformation the Sintashta culture represented. Around 2100 to 1800 BCE, these people revolutionized Bronze Age life. They built approximately 23 fortified settlements with walls reaching about 18 feet high, constructed from adobe bricks and timber frameworks. Every excavated building at settlements like Sintashta, Archaim and Ustye contained smelting ovens and slag, bronze metallurgy on an industrial scale. Most critically for the plague, they developed mobile pastoralism on an unprecedented scale. By domesticating horses with stronger backs specifically bred for riding, they could manage herds 10 times larger than before. With horses, they became the world's first true mobile pastoralists, covering vast territories across the Eurasian steppe. This created what researchers now call the transmission triangle. First, wild rodents such as marmots, ground squirrels and voles carried the plague bacteria in their burrows without dying from it. They were the natural reservoir. Second, domestic sheep grazed across the endless grasslands, coming into contact with contaminated areas or dead infected rodents. When a sheep nuzzled a carcass or grazed on contaminated grass, it could contract plague. Third, humans lived intimately with their livestock, handling wool, butchering meat, and drinking milk. If an infected sheep was not properly butchered or cooked, humans handling the animal could contract the disease. The Sintashta Petrovka culture is famous for their extensive herding over vast pastures aided by innovative horse technologies. This provided plenty of opportunity for their livestock to come into contact with wild animals infected by Yersinia pestis. Unlike flea-borne transmission, which requires dense urban populations and rat infestations, this zoonotic spillover model worked perfectly for mobile pastoralists. As the Sintashta people and their descendants spread westward into Europe and eastward into Central Asia, carrying their innovations in chariots, metallurgy and language, they brought their infected herds with them. Trade networks carried livestock and animal products thousands of miles. The plague did not need fleas to reach Sweden. It had sheep. The genetic analysis revealed one last chilling detail. The plague was evolving in real time. The late Neolithic and Bronze Age lineage, found in both the Archaim sheep and hundreds of ancient humans across Eurasia, showed evidence of evolving under strong purifying selection. The bacterium was stripping away unnecessary genes, streamlining itself for maximum efficiency. But it was also accumulating mutations at its phylogenetic tips, the most recent infections, suggesting the bacterium was adapting to its hosts as it spread from animal to human and back again. The Swedish family burial showed this evolution in action. The 3 waves of plague that struck them over 120 years showed genetic reshuffling, genes lost, added, or moved around in the bacterial DNA. The 3rd wave, the one that devastated multiple generations, appears to have been more virulent than the first 2. Fredrik Siersholm, co-author of the Swedish study, explained that it is in an area of the genome where virulence is coded for. Our hypothesis is that it was more virulent over the generations. For 2,000 years, this lineage was the apex predator of the microbial world, bouncing between wild rodents, domestic animals, and human populations, evolving with each jump. And then, around 1000 BCE, it vanished. The LNBA lineage went extinct. Why did a pandemic that had persisted for 2,000 years suddenly disappear? The answer likely lies in the very thing that made it successful. The Bronze Age plague had specialized so perfectly for one ecological niche, the close contact between mobile pastoralists and their sheep, that it could not adapt when those conditions changed. When climate shifted, when populations settled into permanent agriculture, when herding practices evolved, the transmission triangle broke. Without that specific relationship between wild rodents, domestic livestock, and mobile herders constantly pushing into new grasslands, the plague had no pathway to humans. It was an evolutionary dead end. It would take another 1,000 years for Yersinia pestis to figure out how to hijack fleas, giving rise to the bubonic plague strains that would cause the plague of Justinian in 541 CE and the Black Death in the 1340s. Those strains were descendants of a different lineage, one that had solved the flea problem and could thrive in the rat-infested cities of the medieval world. But for 2,000 years, the LNBA lineage was humanity's first continental pandemic. Taylor Hermes has received a 5-year €100,000 grant, about $110,000, from Germany's Max Planck Society to continue excavating in the southern Urals, searching for more examples of plague in animal remains. He believes this 4,000-year-old sheep-tooth carries an urgent warning for our time. Hermes explained that the Bronze Age was the moment when people in the Sintashta culture began to maintain larger herds of livestock while also riding horses well for the first time. He said the Bronze Age plague was likely a result of that closer contact with animals and frequently moving into areas where they would be exposed to the reservoir. Sound familiar? The Sintashta people were the tech disruptors of their day. Their innovations in horse domestication and mobile pastoralism revolutionized Bronze Age civilization. They spread their technology, their language, and their genes across Eurasia. They built fortress cities and forged bronze weapons that changed warfare forever. But their economic expansion into wild ecosystems triggered the first great pandemic. COVID-19, SARS, MERS, Ebola, and HIV all jumped from animals to humans when we crossed ecological boundaries. The Bronze Age plague was perhaps the first time in human history that our new relationship with domesticated animals created pandemic conditions. 5,000 years later, we are still learning the same lesson. When we encroach on natural environments with new economic needs, there can be deadly consequences, Hermes said. It is important to have greater respect for the forces of nature. From Bronze Age sheep in the Ural Mountains to modern factory farms, the lesson remains the same. The boundary between human civilization and the wild is thinner than we think, and when we cross it carelessly, invisible killers cross back. A 4,000-year-old sheep just taught us that. The question is whether we are finally ready to listen. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how ancient DNA is rewriting history, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next discovery. This is Strata Files.